Hey Rob,
What's up, bud?
hear me?
How's it going?
You can hear me, right?
I can hear you fine. One second.
Excellent. Awesome.
Ugh. So I just want to blame the coronavirus for being late or blame one of my three children, but unfortunately it's just my fault.
Hey, no worries at all. I'm in my room, so it's not like I'm out someplace waiting. Totally fine.
Second, this should be okay. Should be much better.
So thank you for coming on Mandy Blog today.
One second, bro. One sec.
Okay, gotcha.
I got to change something. One second.
Okay.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Great. Better. Where are you located in the universe?
Good question. Yeah, so I'm in Medford, right near Boston, just north.
Okay.
Actually, I'm not sure if you've ever been to Tufts University, or if you know where that is. I'm right near Tufts University.
I went there in 2000 when my Los Angeles private school did a tour of various East Coast colleges. So
That's pretty much my experience with it too. When
So-
I took a tour of the college campus with my mom about, I want to say 9 years ago now or something like that, and across the side of the mascot, their elephant was "fuck Dumbo" or "fuck Jumbo." Somebody had spray painted it.
Okay. So yeah, and but basically what I know about your life is primarily from your LinkedIn profile.
Mhm.
And I'm a fan of people making radical switches in their professional life.
Yeah, I thought that we might have that in common.
I really fucks with that. I like that. Dude, also in your 20s. That's kind of, whenever I hand out unsolicited advice to young people,
Mhm.
and again, I'm in my late 30s now, so I get to say lame shit like young people. Whenever I pass out unsolicited advice, it's almost always to err on the side of experimentation and risk taking in your 20s because you don't really know how free you are.
Sure.
Like like all the meaning in life comes from commitment. It comes from voluntarily anchoring yourself to a family, to a husband, to a wife, to children, to a community, to a craft. But once you are anchored, necessarily you have less liberty.
Absolutely.
And your 20s should basically be about figuring out what's worth anchoring yourself to. And that can often be a process of trial and error. And you need to be pro trial. You need to be pro trying stuff, realizing there's there's so little cost if it doesn't work out. So
your whole quarter life user manual put it so succinctly. That video that you had for, I believe it was We the Internet, it was perfect. That was one of the first videos of yours that I saw, and I had to share that with people because it's exactly the experience that I have, and I know that it's not remotely a unique experience, but so few people tell them, particularly in so few words, sort of not a roadmap per se, but just the basic guiding principles.
Yeah, not a roadmap. Again, a lot of that advice is advice I need to give myself and continue to give myself. But I just didn't know. My 20s just sucked, bro. They were really, really tough. I kind of go into it a little bit. In this one, I make light of it. But I was really drenched in depression and anxiety and existential aimlessness for the bulk of my 20s. And I don't mean to blame everything on larger structural forces. That's not really my stilo, but that was primarily a function of, I think, some just gaping holes in formal education. And I ended up making the video because it just became clear to me that everybody had that experience to some extent, right?
Yeah.
Particularly if you do well in school in any capacity. And you kind of follow the well-grooved tracks that are laid before you. And then you collide with the job market at 22 or maybe 25 if you want to get a law degree. And then holy shit, the game is totally changed. And I have no way how to navigate this. And I'm walking the walk with this. I don't think that formal education has to be so unbelievably insensitive to those real world concerns. I think you should be helping to train young brains how to navigate the professional world at a very young age. And so the school that we send our kids to is actually this kind of model that builds in kind of entrepreneurial thinking and pre-professional thinking into the curriculum. And it's not about just like making money. It's more about most of your life is going to be spent working.
Yep.
So you need to think really hard, like really fucking hard. What should my work be?
Absolutely. I think the three big challenges for education moving forward are going to be critical thinking, adaptability, and collaboration, essentially. Because,
Right.
I mean, I'm not sure if you've heard of this, but it really, I think a lot about the future of education. And it used to be the model of, it was obviously much more exclusive education in the past. And it was sort of your training somebody's mind in critical thought. And maybe it was, you would have more abstract things like philosophy. And then once it became open to more people, it was, we're training people for specific job market skills. But, you know, as things advance so rapidly, as technology advances, as the job market becomes much more uncertain, we need a type of education to fall back on that isn't just teaching career specific skills.
Right. I also think most education fails to do either one of those things, particularly college educations. I mean, we're getting along so well. I don't know if I want to expose you to just the true extent and degree of my radicalism and my crusty conservatism.
Please do. Please do.
But particularly at the college level, I don't think they do a very good job. There's the romantic ideal of like a liberal arts education in which it has essentially no professional application,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, no direct professional application. And it's just about exposing you to the greatest works of the human mind.
Mm-hmm.
And deepening your soul and enriching your life experience, giving you a more full, complex, nuanced, and interior life as a result of interacting with just the best things that humans have ever created in math or science or philosophy. There's that.
Yeah.
Then there's another conception of college, which is more about, professional skills.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're going to get a degree in business administration, or you're going to get a degree in accounting. But the vast majority of students that are currently in higher education are not receiving either one of those things.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it just is a kind of expensive, socially sanctioned vacation from real life for 4 to 6 years, right? And I've just begun, I tend to have kind of more libertarian conservative politics,
Mm-hmm.
but I think I've become softer and more sympathetic to the recognition that at least probably one of the top 3 things driving this kind of resurgent socialism in like my generation and younger is just crushing student debt. How much that has just become an enormous part of the equation. Yeah. And then I, as like a product of privilege, did not have a lot of student debt. And I think I had not appropriately appreciated just how much resentment that stews and how much people feel like they were sold a bill of goods.
Yeah.
They were told that if you complete this degree, you can secure a meaningful, well-remunerated compensation. And that proved to be false. And then on top of that, they have this gigantic bill that as a result of American bankruptcy laws, like you basically can never escape unless you die. Like nothing, like you can never get rid of it.
It's insane.
And that's why, and I think there's a whole host of other kind of policy enthusiasms that people generate from that I don't think are directly tied to that, but they ultimately relate to that sensation and that sense of having been promised something about the 2020 American economy and discovering in the most rude and painful way that was a lie.
Yeah, and I think that same phenomenon, that same sense of maybe cognitive dissonance or sense of betrayal is also what the baby boomers are experiencing with what they were promised about retirement. So this is what I sort of find interesting is like I see a lot of cross-generational shade and hate thrown back and forth, and I'm kind of like, but you each have a major issue, and they're kind of one and the same in a way. And we're not.
What do you mean by retirement? What do you think specifically they've?
Well, so I'm not a retirement expert, but from what I understand, the original system was supposed to be based off of pensions, Social Security, and personal savings. And each one of those has kind of crumbled in their own ways. And not only that, but the idea, sort of the idealization of retirement to begin with, where it's like, oh, this is this time that you get to, you know, it's the golden years, you get to do all these wonderful things, and then a lot of people are finding that it kind of sucks, you know what I mean? And this goes back to education.
Left of purpose. Yeah,
exactly. And this goes back to education and how it's been labeled this thing that you're done with. You assign the early part of your life to education, and then you enter the workforce and you're done with learning, sort of, in a way.
Yeah, it gets siphoned off. And yeah, I mean, and I was always, I think there's, it requires a certain amount of privilege to be condescending to the traditional conception of retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean privilege as traditionally, like as conceived of by like a social justice framework, but privilege, like you have to be in a society that's wealthy enough that it even generates jobs that could be meaningful. Like most people throughout human history would have loved the idea of any period of their life in which they weren't forced into backbreaking labor, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But in the American economy, you are failing to make good on what's possible if you continue to hold that frame of mind, which is just about securing something that's going to sufficiently compensate me and just waiting my time out until I get to retire. Mm-hmm. And apart, like whatever, like the vast majority of things that give the human animal purpose are pursuit centric, right? It's about an active project.
Yeah.
In some capacity.
Yep.
And I'm purposely defining that in the most hazy way possible. And jobs, more often than not, are one of the core sources of the projects that give life meaning. And again, it's not even the achieving of the project. It's just the continual in motion process of attempting to achieve it. That's actually the secret to a good life.
Yeah. There's such purpose wrapped up into it. And well, actually hopping back for a second, because you're talking about how you get put into a groove or a track at some point during education. And I do think it's almost like, in a way, the people who show signs of promise early on are almost, I guess groomed is kind of a loaded word, but it does seem like they're almost in a way groomed for like, okay, we're going to put you into this track. You know what I mean? Other than we're going to let this person sort of potentially become like the next Elon Musk or somebody like that, somebody who's just like a visionary. And maybe those are different.
School system, I don't think the school system ever encourages visionaries. It encourages conformity. I mean, again, and I don't want to speak to everybody's education. I mean, I went to just a bunch of like super fancy ass private schools since I was like in kindergarten, right? That's also not, that's kind of an exceptional experience. But I mean more.
By the way, I share your story where you were saying before is that you graduated without debt. I also don't have debt, and I think about this a lot. Sort of.
Right. That's it. I mean, that's a huge advantage, and that's it. Definition of privilege in the sense that it's an advantage that I did not earn, that I was born into. Right.
Yeah.
I meant grooves more like school as normally practiced at the fanciest level, and even at the least fancy level, is mostly just about training kids about how to be good at school.
Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. How to be a good test taker, right?
Right. And school has a very specific set of rules that you follow. Mm-hmm. It's mostly about doing what adults in authority tell you to do. Mm-hmm. And that, if you excel at it, and then you hop out into the job market, and you are forced to confront the wide open, radically different nature of professional life. I saw this in my 20s. A lot of my friends just instantly escaped to a small set of career tracks that basically mimic that same set of rules and incentives of school, mm-hmm. chiefly being lawyers, right?
Yeah.
And some of them that turned out to be a good decision, a lot of them that turned out to be a horrific decision. Mm-hmm. But I think they were so petrified. And I can't blame them, because I shared the sensation of having to learn a new paradigm, that they're like, well, let me just hop back into a tract that most closely resembles that tract, which immediately lets me go back to school for 3 more years. Thank God. I can take, I don't have to be in the job market for another 3 years. And then, most of at least particularly the high status, well compensated lawyer tracks have a similar dynamic to the school system.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something in me that would not let me do that. That just would not let me do that. And just like, we're unbelievably lucky to be born into a country that is free and rich enough that you even have a faint glimmer of doing something for money that you actually find enjoyable, right? That's like, like over the couple 100,000 years that Homo sapiens have roamed the earth, the vast majority of them never had that opportunity.
Oh yeah, and still.
Why not, in the brief moments between birth and death on this planet, why not try to make good on that opportunity? And I fail at that constantly. My wife will tell you that I fail at that constantly. But I am trying. I am trying. I'm still kind of learning. But it's like, why not go for it, bro? Why not go for it?
Right on. I think that concept from Psych 101 of Maslow's hierarchy has been fairly discredited, but I still like that model. And I think about how, it's something, the term self-actualization, I think that gets a lot of flack, but that is kind of ultimately the goal. And if you can achieve that, if you can get as many people to achieve that as possible, that's the goal. But you get people that stall at each level. And I think that you have to be aware that not everybody is at the same level at any given time, and to be mindful of that, but not necessarily feel shame in your own pursuit of.
That's the whole thing about
stacking the bodies to climb over other people.
Yeah, that's the whole thing about checking privilege, right? Like, my thing is like, don't check privilege, spread privilege.
Yeah.
More people need to be given the opportunity to try to pursue careers that they could find meaningful, right? But if you're the average person born in America in the 21st century, you have unbelievable opportunity available to you.
Yeah.
It's not equally spread. If you're born into like a Syrian refugee camp, or if you were conscripted into like a child soldier army in the Congo, you don't need, like, you were extremely unlucky, and you're probably not going to have the opportunity to pursue like spiritually fulfilling professional work, right?
Sure.
That's the opposite of privilege. But if you do have the privilege of being born in an economy like ours, why not try? And I made that video because I was like, everybody I know that's my cohort feels this way, feels disappointed by their formal education, feels lost, and doesn't even have a framework for how to go about navigating that sense of loss. Why not take some of the lessons I learned through my own failures and stupidity and try to condense them into a stylish mini doc set to only the finest rap beats, that's my process. I've got a certain process, and that's my process.
It's a good process. I do think that the combination of, and this will actually relate to another one of your videos about Instagram, but I do think that this constant comparison of ourselves to other people, which is reinforced, actually I think it's been reinforced by two things over the 20th century. The first actually was Marxism, and the second thing I think was Madison Avenue, Edward Bernays, like sort of those two things together encourage you to look into your neighbor's bowl to see what they're eating, or to compare yourself to them, and basically discourage gratitude as much as possible. Because gratitude ultimately, in the Marxist sense, doesn't create a revolution, and in the consumerist sense, doesn't sell a product. So
fuck, I don't want to start talking about gratitude like I'm good at it, though.
Yeah.
God, I do not want to give anyone that impression. I think you're right. I also think the problem's even deeper than that, in the sense that it'd be nice if this problem of status envy were purely the product of human invented institutions, whether it's a political philosophy or it's extremely successful marketing ad agencies in New York. But to a certain extent, like if you read it as an amateur, like an amateur student of human psychology, a lot of those bad competitive status obsessed traits are kind of built into us as human machines, right? Like this is stuff that has ancient roots. Certain neural processes that were cultivated and selected through the evolutionary process tens of thousands of years ago that served some pro-survival adaptability purpose out on the great African savanna or whatever. I mean, there's an incredible book. I mean, everything I'm saying, I'm just stealing from this really awesome book from a writer by the name of Robert Wright, who wrote a book called Why Buddhism is True. And Why Buddhism is True basically combines his decade-long study into Buddhist scripture and Buddhist mindfulness meditation practice with his also decades-long research and investigation into evolutionary psychology. And it kind of blends the two of them. And it shows how there are pronouncements made by the Buddha 2,000 years ago that we've now found precise neurological evidence to back up, right? About the nature of mind, the craving, the hedonic treadmill, the status obsession, the way that pleasures, no matter how intense, like almost instantly dissipate the second that we achieve them. And yet we're these dumb little monkeys that don't notice that fact and continue to seek the pleasure. And in so doing, make minor hells for ourselves. Like, and all this stuff was seen by this one, this ancient genius, the Buddha. And now there's this, 50 years of evolutionary psychology to back up in detail his claims about the human condition. But that means this shit is much deeper than Marx. It's much deeper than Madison Avenue.
Yep.
It's much deeper than television commercials for Oreos. I mean, it's much deeper than all that shit. It's much deeper than capitalism. Sure. This is something built into the Homo sapien.
Those are the things that just figured out how to exploit those lower.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Right. I mean, this is kind of also I think you definitely see this in the Instagram video. Mm-hmm. Well, I kind of started as a libertarian. I mean, my first job in DC, I worked at the Cato Institute, which is a libertarian think tank. Mm-hmm. But my turn to a more conservative disposition means I continue to recognize the wealth generating power of markets. Yeah. But I'm much more willing now to say that businesses can also be malign influences in a way that I wouldn't when I was 23 years old and just insisted on talking about the fountainhead to anyone that would listen to me, right?
Funny you say that, because the Atlas Shrugged was the first book in college that I felt was kind of like, it brought me into reading again. And looking back at it was like... I
mean, I don't hate, it's a good starter course, but it shouldn't be the whole meal.
Right? Oh, yeah. I mean, looking back at it, I first of all recognize above all that Ayn Rand needed an editor bad for Atlas Shrugged.
Yeah. 1,000 pages, including an 80-page monologue. Yeah. Yeah. It's also, this is not going to resonate with you, but there's no children in Atlas Shrugged.
That was
tell you something about the limits
of
objectivism as a life philosophy. Mm-hmm. It's like no one has any kids. Like,
yeah.
Okay.
And not to mention, I do have a problem with Ayn Rand's idealization of the business person. Like they're only forces of good, basically. Like they don't seem to. They don't seem to make.
Yeah, but I think the confusion is, so I make this Instagram video, and I think it resonates with people. But then, kind of my libertarian friends instantly dismiss it, not by trying to make the argument that it's good for a 12-year-old to be spending 10 to 12 hours a day on this brutal status competition that is Instagram likes. Mm-hmm. No one actually defends the practice. No one thinks that's a good way to cultivate a young, supple female mind. Mm-hmm. They're more like, oh, what? So you just want the government to nationalize Instagram and shut it down? You want there to be new regulations? It's like, just because I'm problematizing something doesn't mean I necessarily think there's a public policy solution for it. I mean, obviously Instagram has, there's already some existing regulatory structures, but just because I think it's a problem generated by the market doesn't mean that I think there's a government solution. Mm-hmm. But it does mean that I'm just increasingly skeptical of that shit. I mean, I even, There's also ways that I think capitalist forces and market competition drives an isolation and a siloing of of human beings.
Yeah.
And we're deeply tribal, kin-driven creatures that we really need, like tight, thick social ties, not just to our immediate families, but to a wide range of members of the community. And there's a certain set of incentives and economic pressures that under a free market system tend to degrade and corrode those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I really believe that. I don't think that means that the government needs to step in and start forcing people to live in tight-knit kinship tribes. Like, that has its own set of problems. But I just, so I'm trying, that's the line that I'm trying to toe. And I'm essentially a political constituency of one, it feels like, in America, where there's very few people that can understand that you can hold those two positions at the same time.
Well, your philosophy, and this is what I've been trying to convince other people of, is your philosophy should be Robism. Mine should be Patrickism. Like, there should be, how do you convince, it's tough. And I'm not sure every mind is, I mean, I'm convinced that every mind isn't equally capable of doing it. But basically, you want to try to create as much of your own narrative as possible rather than taking large chunks of pre-digested narrative. Because like I almost see it as like people who don't try to integrate all different ideas and engage with new ideas, concepts that push against them. It's like the people with the narrative that they just said, okay, I'm going to believe this. It's like their worldview is a big plate glass window. And the people who are constantly engaging in information, their worldview is a big stained glass window. And so if somebody comes along and throws a rock, the big plate glass window people are going to, like, their whole conception of the world in life is going to fall apart. But if you're constantly synthesizing new information and putting new fragments into this mosaic, then
Right.
Just one little tiny piece might break off and you're okay.
Yeah, well, I think I want to partially agree, partially disagree, in the sense that I do think, now this is going to get some this is like some deep Reddit channel shit where like you do need to deprogram yourself in a certain sense, that if you just go with the default cultural programming handed to you in a modern capitalist society,
Mm-hmm.
you'll kind of waste a lot of your life.
Yeah.
And not because, but thing is, not because there is some pernicious Illuminati of like 12 dudes
Mm-hmm.
that are just trying to program you so they can sell you more Coke products.
Mm-hmm.
They're just this kind of emergent organic culture driven by evolutionarily endowed instincts in the Homo sapien creature that has become the dominant cultural model, that isn't actually about stoking human flourishing. It's mostly about making a bunch of like complacent office drones and consumers. So you do have to deprogram yourself. And that in part means being willing to embrace an individual philosophy, being an iconoclast, a contrarian, willing to break free from the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like the articulating it as Robism though, or Patrickism, because that seems to imply that in my personal religion, I'm going to worship myself.
That's fair enough.
Worshiping myself, which it turns out is the worst possible thing to do for your own personal happiness.
Yeah.
And also, I'm not an object worthy of worship. Like, I'm a dummy like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
And most of my personal philosophy is me just taking things that people that are much smarter than me, that have much deeper reserves of wisdom, just taking their things and just gobbling it down and trying to make it my own.
Sure.
And I don't think that every personal philosophy is equally conducive to human flourishing.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there is a base set of needs that we have just as human creatures that any philosophy and any theology needs to get right. Sure. At the same time, there's of course like unbelievable variability as well as to what people like and what people need in order to flourish. So I don't want to oversimplify it.
But maybe we need to take a little bit of a step back from the whole relativism where everything is equal.
The relativism is just not it's like, it's not an actionable philosophy. And also, people who say they're relativists are not relativists. Mm-hmm. Typically, they mean they're against, what is it? I don't know. It's like their relativism, the people that are relativists are also they're they can often be quite trigger happy when it comes to making objective moral claims about the universe.
Yeah. It's like everything is suspect except
Right, everything you're doing is wrong. But wait a minute, what do you mean by wrong? Do you mean according to whose definition? Right? It kind of eats itself.
It's paradoxical. All
Right.
assertions are wrong, and it's like, well, what about that assertion you just made?
Right. Right. I mean, but I have, and this is part of, again, my crotchety conservatism. As I age, I think I essentially still self-identify as agnostic, but I've begun to have more sympathy for the essential role of the church, of traditional Judeo-Christian religions.
Yes.
I'm saying in America, the American manifestation of traditional religion, and both the community cultivating function that they serve, and that you need to have, it's like a really hardcore eliminationist materialism in which everything is just a bunch of random atoms bouncing up against each other. Whether or not that's true, which it probably isn't, whether or not it's true, it is not an actionable life philosophy. Like, people, you can't believe it, or else you'll be thrown into an infinite pit of despair. And there needs to be something transcendent that you look up to in order for life to be meaningful. And I think the church, I'm shocked to hear myself say this, serves that essential function. And also it's borne out in the happiness data as well. We know that, like, one of the top 5 things to do if you want to be a happier person is start going to church on a regular basis, because it's through this evolutionary process, it survived, and it meets these kind of deep core foundational human needs.
It does. And by the way, I go to a church too when it's open, when it's not virus time. But
Of course.
I definitely try to parse the principles from the institution. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not Catholic, but that's an example of something that I look at. And this is any ideology, any religion. I always look at even Scientology, like, as corrupt as, the David Miscavige institution of Scientology, with everything that the documentaries are made about, is, I do believe that, like, individual Scientologists abiding by their principles are probably fine, just like somebody abiding by Christian principles, Muslim principles, Buddhist principles.
Right.
And going back to the book was the Why Buddhism is True. Yeah. It really is interesting because it almost seems like we go through seeing a book like that, or discovering a truism like that was written thousands of years ago. You just go, are we in the dark ages right now? Like, I felt like we were enlightened.
I know. Well, you should really read, there's this book this is the book that just fucked me up. It's a book by a war journalist by the name of Sebastian Junger. He wrote this book called Tribe a couple of years ago. And that's where I get a lot of my ideas related to a lot of the rhythms of modern life tearing away at kinship fabrics, and that being problematic because humans are built for kinship. We're built for the collective. We're built to feel like we're part. Our identity expands beyond the 3 pounds of meat in our brain and ties into and anchors into other people. That's kind of just an essential precursor for us to live meaningful, purposeful lives. And I think it's actually the pull quote from David Brooks that's on the front of my copy.
The Free Enterprise Institute?
That's Arthur Brooks. David Brooks is the New York Times columnist.
Okay, got it.
He, as a basic ass conservative suburban dad, I have to mention David Brooks at least once in every media interview I do. I'm sorry to impose that upon you, but there's a quota I have to meet just as a member. And his quote is something to the effect, like, I read this book, it's only like 90 pages. Yeah. It's like, it's difficult not to walk away from it thinking that modern society is a bit of a mistake. And you're like, damn, son. And David Brooks is a conservative. Like, I live in Washington, D.C. He basically wrote for every major kind of Republican libertarian journal out there, the Wall Street Journal, Weekly Standard, National Review. And he's been like, yeah, I don't know. Like, I think that maybe neoliberalism does have some limitations, and it's isolating. And I think, now I'm really just like pontificating in a fact-free manner that I normally reserve just for my wife and my good friends. But when you talk about the Instagram video, I do think there's an alienation and an aimlessness that a lot of people feel.
Yes.
That they numb through cheap digital distractions, particularly social media. And that is not a viable long-term solution, that you have to do the hard work of building analog connections.
Yeah, and maybe they create what they can't seem to
right
themselves to bring about in real the analog reality.
But in their defense as well, like it's much easier to have a Facebook friend than a real friend. Like a real friend, a real friend, like a real friend that you can will listen to you when you have to tell them bad news and can help you. Like
I look at that as one subset of, I really try to look at everything mostly through understanding rather than judgment as much as possible.
Yeah, but then also, Patrick, like half of my stick for my mini docs is judgment. So
yeah,
that would be.
Well, let's go into that. I do agree that judgment is necessary, like, because it holds people to standards. But at the same time, when maybe you're originally trying to learn about something, you can suspend judgment. Like that might be my asterisk.
Increasingly, particularly for my political stuff, mm-hmm. It's not having judgment, but it's not being some pre-programmed partisan drone who just regurgitates the judgments that were fed to me by the sanctioned demigods of my particular political tribe, right? Okay. Like I obviously have a certain political disposition. Like this morning, I finished shooting the stand-up for a documentary that probably won't come out till May about the 1619 Project, this big New York Times feature that came out in November that was about kind of slavery and tried to have this critical race theory, radical revision to the American story, trying to position slavery as the foundational influence of every aspect of modern American life, right? Mm-hmm. There's a certain set of like conservative critiques of that.
Yeah.
Much of which, though, just felt very reflexive and knee-jerky and partisan and tribal to me. And so what I'm trying to do with this video is critique it, demonstrate some profound intellectual errors, but in a way that is playful, heterodox, and doesn't necessarily conform to some neat political categorization. Like where I'll say things that I believe, and I am trying to muster the courage to say, even though they break from what is going to be the set of partisan expectations if you were to watch a video like that. Sure. I'm trying to, sometimes I do that well, sometimes I fail at it, but it is the ambition, it is the ambition.
It's an admirable ambition, particularly because I personally believe that the over-labeling is just going to be sort of the death of us, in the sense of, I had heard a while back or read that category violation is one of the biggest sort of fears in the back of your mind. Like right. If you look at most monsters, there's some combination of things. You can't define them. And so that's partly why we throw labels on things. And it's been amusing to some extent because, well, aside from the labels, this idea of, for example, the contradictions. And one example is that gender and sex is on this spectrum. And I tend to say, okay, I actually believe that, it can be bimodal, but there's some people in between. But why isn't racism on a spectrum too? Why is it binary for racism? Like you're either not a racist, you are a racist. Why isn't there, like, people have moments of racism, people are sometimes racist, people, why aren't there degrees? Why is it not that way with political ideology? Because those things are convenient. So it's right. Funny, or it's interesting to look at these contradictions, these self-contradictions, right. The labels that people use.
People impose those binaries typically because it's advantageous for them professionally.
Yeah.
Not because they actually map onto the world.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's like, but there are just things like Twitter where the incentive structure for it is such that you are encouraged to embrace the binary and to viciously enforce the binary wherever you happen to fall on it.
Mm-hmm.
That just because of the nature of the human mind, the nature of the form, because of retweets and likes, you're just not going to go viral with stuff that refuses to conform. You know, the people that are the most successful, the people that lean hardest into it. Yeah.
I've also heard that, and I tend to agree with it, is that people in positions of power, they have the worst information around them in general, unless they're really, really attentive and trying to plug into more of the fringe. And it was in, I'm not sure if you've ever read any of Yuval Noah Harari's stuff,
Course,
like
yeah.
Sapiens or anything like that. But I think it was in 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. He talked about how power, the people in those positions are surrounded by sycophants, basically, that them, you know, it's like, how did the Vietnam War happen as it happened, or the war in Iraq? Maybe like that information trickles up and each layer tweaks it a little bit, makes it advantageous to them, and then the next layer tweaks it, so the person in the middle gets it's almost like space-time, the most distortion.
Right. Well, and the best leaders make a point to engineer conflict and contradiction into their closest knit circles of advisors, right?
Yeah.
It basically counteract that. Kind of the Abraham Lincoln team of rivals paradigm, where you actually purposely invite into your inner circle people that you know are going to disagree with you.
Yeah.
Just in order to make sure that you don't start to occupy some artificial bubble in which there's insufficient friction.
Sure. So perhaps it's easier than it's ever been before to effectively do that if you're paying attention through.
You try, but there's also, as Patrick, there's deep, deep pleasures into being surrounded by people that just will exclusively affirm you. There's a reason most people do it, bro. Even I do. I mean, I'm not above that shit. I'm not above that shit.
Yeah. Well, it's also, it touches on, and I'm not sure if you know Mark Manson, the guy that wrote the Subtle Art of Not Giving Up.
I'm a subscriber. Come on.
Okay, good.
I needed to have a child though, because some of his advice is so deeply impractical for people that have small humans.
Yes.
We talked about, I felt guilty in this quarantine for staying up and playing video games 4 nights in a row till 3 a.m. I'm like, bro, I don't relate.
Yeah.
Like, you need to start getting on a schedule. Wake up, meditate for 15 minutes.
Yes.
Exercise for 45 minutes. Have a perfectly balanced, low-carb breakfast, and then you work for 4 straight hours. You do the deep work, drop in Cal Newport. I'm like, okay, I understand. This is just, we need to evolve this paradigm so it has applications to people that have all these small humans that have started to occupy our physical space. Yes. I'm not meditating first thing in the morning.
I definitely recognize
first thing in the morning.
I definitely recognize that criticism. The part that I thought was relevant and useful was what he talks about with relationships that are unconditional, and how most of our relationships, without us realizing it, are probably conditional.
Yeah. And you got to work on it too. I mean, yeah. I mean, you get that lesson in real time once you have kids, and how that evolves the relationship with your partner, that it deepens it if you let it deepen. But I think he's good about saying you want unconditional relationships outside the family as well. That part of that's kind of like the ultimate friendship, which is, I feel like I didn't really know what friendship was until later in my 20s, that you think it's just people that read the New York Times and have witty things to say about current events. Those people are nice, but that's just I mean, I think Manson, like, he tiers friendships, and that is a tier of friend, but it's not the deep core.
Yeah, he's kind of like a snarky Buddhist type. I don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, I read The Subtle Art wanting to not like it, and I was like, I fucks with this dude. I like him.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I agree with everything he says, but I like, he's a fantastic writer. He's obviously deeply learned. I mean, he'll read complicated philosophical tomes and figure out ways to articulate them in ways that feel actionable and interesting. And I think, I wish this were 3 months ago when I'd freshly read it. I would have had all sorts of just cool shit to say about it, but a lot of it's faded from my brain since then. I mean, I think the runaway success of that book testifies to the fact that people had begun to realize that traditional self-help life advice wasn't worth the paper it was printed on. Mm-hmm. And he's good at all, because people used to think life advice or therapy or an appropriate spiritual path is all about going inward. It's all about worshiping myself, figuring myself out. Yeah. And he is good at making it clear that that's a futile effort, that you'll fall infinitely if all you're doing is looking into yourself. Mm-hmm. And what you need is to anchor yourself outside of yourself. You need to find purposes and people and craft that you can devote yourself to, that you ideally you care more about than you care about yourself. Sure. And of the many miraculous things that having children do is, no matter how dumb and selfish you are, as I was very dumb and selfish before I had kids, some process will kick into place once they come along. Mm-hmm. And it'll be it's evolution or dharma or God or whatever you want to call it, you will finally have something that it will be very clear to you in your deepest bone marrow, you care more about that being than you care about yourself.
Some things just liberating. That's pretty profound. That's
yeah. I mean, it takes, doesn't mean but like, it's, we're like, oh shit, I would actually die for these children. Like, that's actually kind of empowering. Like, there are things that are more important than my own existence. Right? I was like, oh, okay. That's actually nice. That's like a nice sensation. That's a liberation from the ego. Now now I sound like Ryan Holiday, but he touches on the same thing.
The discovery of something profoundly more important than yourself that you will just absolutely dedicate yourself to. And these are things that people have talked about since time immemorial. Right. And like, it just never clicks. I always
it also never comes up in formal education. They're too building school is either just an elaborate, barely camouflaged daycare so that parents can go to work, or it's a time just for kids to engage in often pathological socializing behaviors with their fellow cohort. Or there's a little bit of stuff that's about some hard skills in science or math or whatever that we hope will cultivate critical thinking, that will get you preferably into one of the top tier Ivy League universities. At worst, UPenn, right? Mm-hmm. But there basically is no formal education at all about like, how do you live a good life? And there's happened to be literature on this, people that are much smarter than me, much smarter than any of us, that have thought about this. And you can come at it from a bunch of different traditions. But I was listening to Sam Harris interviewed the woman who runs this who's a positive psychologist, social psychologist at Yale. And
she kind of Waking Up. Was it the podcast?
Yeah, so I think 2 years ago she kind of came to national attention when the New York Times did a piece about her class. I think it's called Psychology in the Good Life, because it was the most popular class at Yale, where it's like its first semester that had been in operations, 1,200 kids, like a fourth of the student body had signed up. Mm-hmm. I think the class itself is like kind of limited and basic, but the popularity of it, I think, testified to this deep, deep thirst for practical life philosophy. Yeah. That a lot of kids are like, Jesus, school cannot just be about checking the boxes to get to the next phase of school. Like, I want to have a rigorous institutional education in what it means to actually live a good life. So even like a kind of limited class like that just has overwhelming demand.
Yeah, I mean, it's partly what we've seen, I think, with Jordan Peterson, his phenomenon.
Yeah, of course. I mean, again, I'm like a basic ass suburban conservative dad. I fucks with Jordan Peterson. Yeah. He's not a guru. He's not a demigod. It doesn't mean I have to affirm everything he believes in. But just like the fact that he can give 3-hour-long lectures on the New Testament, they have 2 million views, right? Yeah. It means that people are thirsty for this shit. They're thirsty for it. And I'm also kind of struggling in my work, not struggling, but I'm increasingly, most of the stuff on our plate is political. And again, we're trying to do it in a playful, heterodox, beautiful, aesthetically, visually, audibly engaging style.
By the way, just real quick, could you define heterodox? I've heard the term a lot. I just don't know exactly.
I mean, it just means not
orthodox.
Little partisan troll. Yeah.
Okay,
Like maybe in the sense of not being easily politically categorized. Although we obviously have political leanings, but being able to draw from different traditions and try to create a new interesting whole.
Okay.
But I don't have anything, I haven't done as much like quarter life user manual stuff. And I'd like to do more of it because not because I'm this font of great wisdom, but because I do think there's a thirst for it.
Yes. There's a huge, massive thirst because people are looking all over the place for it. It'd be nice if they had a distillation. And that's what I really liked about your video. And by the way, because we're sort of here in your realm of what you do, again, Good Kid Productions. Could you explain Good Kid Productions a bit? Because I liked the tagline on LinkedIn where you said you're essentially like Vice, but with intellectual rigor. And
my business partner never approved that, and he doesn't like it, and I refuse to change it. Well, Patrick, I'm so glad you asked about Good Kid Productions. We are a global media production shop located here in Washington, D.C., meaning we make short documentaries for the internet. Yeah, I mean, it's my business partner and I, and we have some employees, and we get contracted with YouTube channels that like our style, and we kind of specialize in 6 to 12 minute documentary style videos for the internet. And I mean, we're defined by certain aesthetics, an intellectual approach, a commitment to storytelling. And I don't think there's anything else like us out there.
That's what I've seen. It was sharp. Your productions, the ones that I've seen, are just sharp and eye-catching.
So we think we've hit a hole in the market. I think I've found something I'm reasonably good at. And that's how we rock. And if people are interested, they should just go to goodkidproductions.com. Patrick, I don't want to cut you short, but I have another call in
totally fine.
Minutes. So again, I'm here and I'm a font of just astonishing wisdom. So if there's a final question that you have, so that I can bless you in the audience with just these pearls from heaven, please.
I want to basically promote your content. I want to say thank you for producing stuff that is thoughtful and thought-provoking. I want to let people know to go to, as you said, goodkidproductions.com, but also on YouTube as well. So that's how I originally found you, and get a taste for Rob's videos. They're fantastic. Seriously, the topics that have to do with all types of problems that people just don't talk about right now. So last thing I just wanted to say is thank you for coming on today, Rob. I really, really appreciate it.
Happy to be here, Patrick. And before we log off, can you just email me the episode when it goes up?
Absolutely.
I'm an old man, so it needs to go to my email. Don't Snapchat that shit. Don't TikTok that shit to me.
I'll send it to your
Instagram. Send me it to my email.
Okay, will do. And the plan is to have it up on Friday.
Cool. Thank you, bro.
Yep. You're welcome back anytime. And if you ever need help on a documentary, let me know.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, shoot me your email and we'll talk. Okay.
Will do. See you, Rob.